Releasing in June of 2015 to critical acclaim, Final Fantasy XIV's first expansion, Heavensward, continued the comeback story that began with A Realm Reborn, and propelled 14's story into reverence, cementing it as one of the finest in the series. This, for the majority of players, is where Final Fantasy XIV goes from simply good to something truly special, with vastly improved presentation and pacing, for the most part, and featuring an all-new English voice cast. Heavensward stands shoulder to shoulder with some of the best games in the entire Final Fantasy franchise. But what was it that made this expansion so great? Did it truly fix every issue with A Realm Reborn? Well, we'll get to that. I adored Heavensward. The shift in focus from the story being all about you and what happens around you to the more personal tales of the supporting cast leads to some truly excellent moments that really stick with you. I could quote a single line and I know it'd bring at least someone watching this to tears. But don't worry, there'll be plenty of time for that later. So pack your thermal underwear and get your spears at the ready. It's time to take a look back at Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward. Let's start by recapping the story so far. Our fresh-faced adventurer, blessed by the Mother Crystal Hydaelyn, was pivotal in stopping the 14th Legion of the Garlean Empire's campaign in Eorzea, and upon bringing down the Ultima weapon and defeating Gaius van Baelsar, we've been crowned the Warrior of Light. Alongside our companions, the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, we continue to fight back the Primals, godlike beings summoned forth by the realm's various beast tribes, and safeguard Eorzea. After a tragic series of events, we're on the run, framed for regicide. Our friends are missing, and what few of us remain are heading north to take refuge in Ishgard, a nation locked in an endless battle with a horde of dragons. Our story picks up exactly where the events of A Realm Reborn left off. Sheltered by our dear friend Haurchefant, we finally receive some good news. Count Edmund de Fortombe has agreed to take us, Alphinaud and Tataru in as wards of House Fortombe. Passing through the Gates of Judgment, we finally enter the city. Ishgard is a very medieval European-inspired city, with a huge cathedral known as the Vault at its centre. Led by 4 noble houses and the Ishgardian Orthodox Church, its people worship Helone, goddess of war, known also as the Fury, and value honour and tradition above all else. And if you're thinking, I bet the religion causes all of the city's problems and will be breaking traditions in some way, honestly, you'd be right on the money. And I'm sorry if that sort of spoils the story right off the bat, but it's the way the game presents its story and builds up to these otherwise predictable conclusions that makes it so special. At any rate, we're introduced to Count Fortombe, given a quick tour of the city, and it's straight off to work as we're tasked with helping his sons, Artoirel and Emmanuelaine, with their various duties to the house. This is actually a neat little thing that each expansion does. At the beginning of each story, the main scenario is split off into 2 paths, each leading to a different region. You have to do both, but it's nice that you're given a choice of whose storyline to pursue first. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the vast improvement in the English voice acting department here.
That reason has been with me all along, guiding me. Eorzea's blade of light, shearing through endless shrouds of darkness.
During my travels, I had oft enjoyed tales of the Scions and their exploits. But after a time, I began to hear whispers of a gifted and theretofore unknown band of adventurers.
It's a little jarring at first going from ARR's old voices to the new ones, but this is a significant upgrade, and I can't think of many instances moving forward where the voice acting comes anywhere near ARR's levels of awkward and cringeworthy. So my first choice here was Artoirel, mostly because I wanted to get the least welcoming one out of the way first. He's rather sceptical of our abilities and reluctantly takes us to the Curthus Western Highlands. This is where I have to sing Heavensward's praises again, as we're treated to a short introduction to each new zone, with Count Fortombe serving as narrator. It's a tiny feature, but I love how the game takes time to give you a proper introduction to each major area moving forward. It helps pull you into the world and really makes you want to explore your new surroundings. It's little things like this that make all the difference to me, and Heavensward is full of stuff like this. So we reach the settlement of Falcon's Nest in Western Curthus, and end up hot on the trail of a group of Dravanian heretics. Another thing I'm impressed by here is the scale of the solo duties. They're significantly larger than in A Realm Reborn, with huge sections of the map available to play around with, loads of enemies dotted about, and actual choice in terms of how to tackle them. Do you try to sneak past or simply cut your way through everyone? It's relatively simplistic, but this beats being restricted to a tiny region. It's nice to have a bit of freedom in an otherwise linear story. Our search leads us to an abandoned farmhouse where a familiar face awaits, Iceheart. She admits to being blessed with the Echo, which we kind of already figured out, and believes herself chosen to bring man and dragon together, as they once were over 1,000 years ago. Midgårdsommer graces us with his presence to explain that our perception of time is very different to that of the dragons. They remember events from thousands of years ago as if they'd just happened. To us, the dragons are holding a grudge for generations, but relatively speaking, it's like it happened yesterday to them. You just can't fathom that kind of perception of time. Anyway, we let Iceheart go, as she doesn't seem hostile towards us or Ishgard, and it's back to the city to pick up our second of the split paths, as we join Heavensward, the younger and much more eager brother, on a trip to the Sea of Clouds, a region in the skies above Ishgard resembling, as the name suggests, a vast white ocean dotted with these huge floating islands. We're quickly introduced to the local beast tribe, the bird-like Vanu, who capture our young lord. So our rescue mission begins as we head deep into Vanu territory, cutting our way through to Heavensward before Haurchefant arrives to back us up. The rescue doesn't quite go as planned, as we end up cornered and outnumbered by the Vanu when all of a sudden a gigantic flying whale leaps out of the clouds and flies over the island we're on. This is Bismarck, the primal worshipped by the Vanu, and that was one hell of an entrance. Conveniently for us, Sid just happened to be in the area, and comes to our rescue aboard the Enterprise along with Biggs and Wedge. Turns out the Ironworks lads were hired to work on a much bigger airship that we saw on the way in here. Alright, I suppose that makes sense. It might have landed better if we saw Sid on the way in, but the excellent setup so far more than excuses the occasional "and then someone appeared out of nowhere to save the day" moment. Regardless, it's back to Ishgard to warn everybody about the new primal, and let Heavensward get slapped around by his old man for getting himself kidnapped. That's a win in my books. But there's no rest for the weary today, as upon our return we find out that Alphinaud and Tataru have been arrested under suspicion of heresy. Meeting with Aymeric, we come up with a plan to get our friends out of this mess. A trial by combat, where we act as the non-combatant Tataru's champion and, alongside Alphinaud, defeat two members of the Heavensward, their accuser, Sir Grinno, and Sir Polacrane, in order to secure their freedom. The battle itself is nothing special, but it's a solid introduction to the kinds of people we're dealing with, an authority that isn't afraid to abuse its power by preying on the people's fears. But that's not all. We're summoned to meet with Archbishop Thordan VII of the Ishgardian Orthodox Church to receive an official apology, and to learn that Thordan had met with and been offered the help of the Ascians. This is briefly alluded to in a cutscene towards the end of A Realm Reborn, but it turns out the Archbishop is keeping them at arm's length for the time being, with the intention of eventually trying to do away with them. Thordan's an interesting character. He gives off obvious bad guy vibes, but he's not on the Ascians' side either. Combine that with Iceheart not really being against us as well, and you've got a lot of groups that aren't strictly good or evil, which is a far cry from ARR's more black and white approach. And speaking of A Realm Reborn, there's a little something that happened back there that we're about to go and deal with. Back at Fortemps Manor, Tataru tells us she heard that General Rauban is due to be executed for his crimes against the Syndicate. Heading to Limsa Lominsa, we meet with Admiral Merlwyb to catch up on current events. So officially, Nanamo is recovering from illness, as word of her death reaching the public would cause more problems than it'd solve. Regarding Rauban, he's been moved away from Uldar's prison by the Crystal Braves. With a little help from our Doman allies, we learn that he's being kept in Halatali, a site once used to house animal pens and holding cells for Uldar's Colosseum, and one of A Realm Reborn's early optional dungeons. I'm gonna have to praise the solo duties again. This one's great. It's a run-through part of the dungeon with some backtracking when the Braves set off a gas trap, culminating in a showdown with that traitorous bastard Ilberd, who explains the whole reason he's doing what he's doing is for a means to liberate his homeland of Alamigo. He knows he's being used to do other people's dirty work, but he doesn't care as long as it leads him to be able to free his people. His actions are awful, but you can understand his motivations and almost sympathise with him. It's some great writing and again shows not everything is so simple. There's a depth to these characters that ARR never really showed off. At any rate, we free Rauban while Ilberd and his cronies escape, with Yugiri perplexingly stopping us from giving chase. Back outside, we're approached by a mysterious hooded man who asks us to come to the Waking Sands where Urianger awaits us, along with the man's employer, a member of the Syndicate by the name of Dulala. It turns out the whole plot to assassinate Nanamo was a ruse. Teleji Adeleji had planned to kill her, but Lola Rito caught wind of his plans and had the poison swapped out for a strong sedative at the last minute. The plan was to dispose of Teleji by manipulating Rauban into cutting him down, which, definitely worked. It's a bit of a roundabout way to kill somebody, but I won't deny it does a great job of showing how everyone in the Syndicate is trying to undermine each other's plans. Big Game of Thrones vibes, for better or for worse. Before we can investigate Dulala's claims, however, Alphinaud receives a call from Tataru claiming that the Dravanians are preparing for another assault on Ishgard, so back north we go. Alphinaud suggests we enlist the help of Iceheart to try and negotiate with the dragons in the hopes that they back down. Estinian overhears our conversation and decides to join the party, on the basis that this negotiation could buy Ishgard time to prepare, or that there could be a chance to kill Nidhogg and end the conflict then and there. On our way out, Tataru gives Alphinaud a new outfit. There's a handful of these scenes dotted about, and they're basically an excuse to update the Science character models more than anything. I don't know why they make such a big deal out of the new outfits. I mean, fashion is a big part of the game, and if we can change clothes it makes perfect sense for everyone else to, but I digress. It's a very smart costume and finally lets us more easily differentiate between him and his sister when she eventually shows up. So it's off to track Iceheart down in western Kurthus. Our search takes us through the same spot we fought Shiva before, this time taking down some of the heretics who refuse to believe that we don't want to kill her, before learning how to signal her for a meeting. This is where we finally learn the origins of the Dragonsong War. Over 1,000 years ago, an Elezen tribe sought to claim Kurthus as their home. The lands were already home to the dragons, who weren't about to give up their home to these invaders. Naturally, a war broke out between the two sides, until Shiva attempted to make peace, and fell in love with the great worm Hraesvelgr. Because of the massive difference in lifespan between the two, Shiva wanted her soulmate to consume her, so that their spirits would be entwined for eternity. The tale of their love spread throughout the dragons and Elezen alike, causing the warring factions to lay down their arms. For 200 years peace reigned in Kurthus, until a group of traitorous knights took the eyes of a dragon, the source of their longevity and strength, by force, shattering the peace and beginning the 1,000-year Dragonsong War. Now we're told that Nidhogg is the one who lost an eye because of this, and while Ysinian does possess one of the eyes, that's not the whole story. Over the years the truth has been lost to time, with the Ishgardians basing their whole religion around the lie that Nidhogg attacked the Elezen king Thordan and his Knights 12, with the king being killed and his son defeating the dragon and taking Nidhogg's eye. We'll learn more as we go, but I love how the story is presented in such a believable way. Everyone's got their own version of events, and each side would obviously paint themselves in a better light than their enemies. It makes perfect sense that the story wouldn't be accurate after all this time, and uncovering the truth as we go is a great way to keep the player invested. So Iceheart agrees to go with us to parley with Hraesvelgr, but before we leave, it's time to talk about crystals again, isn't it? So when Midgardsormr stripped us of the Blessing of Light, the 6 crystals of light we'd been collecting lost their power. Through our deeds, the crystals regained their power one by one, eventually giving us back our blessing and allowing us to communicate with Hydaelyn again. That's right, it's another story about collecting, or in this case powering back up, the crystals. It's meant to show our growth as a character and as Hydaelyn's champion, and does have some pretty big implications later on, but it's still a typical by the numbers Final Fantasy story. Fortunately for Heavensward though, the crystals mostly take a back seat to the story itself, they're more just milestones on our adventure. The next step on our journey is the Dravanian Forelands, a lush countryside region containing ancient ruins and the path to Som Al, the mountain leading to the home of the dragons. Let's talk about questing, shall we? Up to this point, quests have mostly been a case of either killing things, fetching things, talking to NPCs, or the big solo duties I gushed about earlier. This zone introduces a new quest structure. On the way to your destination, you have to stop off at certain points along the way to kill a handful of enemies. It's nothing groundbreaking, of course, but it does give you a better sense of fighting your way through a region. After all, it wouldn't make much sense if you could just run through enemy territory with no issue, would it? This isn't something that crops up too often, but at least the devs are adding some variety to questing here and there. And when you hit a stretch of quests that are just go here and talk to an NPC, things like this are more than welcome. So we reach Anyx Shrine, a group of towers occupied by the dragons, to meet with Vidofnir, a friend of Iceheart. Just to avoid any confusion, Iceheart's told us at this point that she wants to be referred to by her real name, Ysayle, so I'll be doing that moving forward. Other characters still call her Iceheart here and there, so just be aware that Iceheart and Ysayle are the same person. Vidofnir, while friendly, can't open the way to Som Al for us, as they've got their own problems to contend with. The nearby beast tribe known as the Nath have summoned their god. Our party decides to go after it in order to gain favour with the dragons and hopefully gain access to the mountain. The Nath are this sort of insect-like tribe who operate under this sort of hive mind they call the One Mind, with a sort of king called the Overmind sitting at the centre, connected to every member of the colony. There are no individuals among the Nath. Every member feels, knows and thinks the same as the rest of them. There are, however, certain Nath who have lost their connection to the Overmind and developed their own distinct personalities. These are referred to as non-mind, or Vath. The Vath are a more peaceful colony, occasionally trading with people and the like. We meet with these Vath and learn that the best way to get to the Nath's god is to let ourselves get captured by them. So alongside Ysayle, we head straight for their hideout, get caught, and are brought before Ravana. This is the first wholly original primal in Final Fantasy XIV. He's this honourable warrior type who looks straight up like a Dark Souls boss. You could easily see him tearing through dragons left and right. Ysayle, in her attempt to bargain for peace, challenges the primal to a trial by combat. If we win, Ravana and his forces withdraw from Dravanian territory, but if he wins, we're to serve in his army for the rest of our lives. So Ysayle opts for a 1v1 and summons Shiva again. It's a pretty good fight scene given the limited animations they had to work with. She's no match for Ravana, however, so it's our turn next to rejoice in the glory of combat. Our first trial in Heavensward is outstanding. Lots of varied attacks and AoEs to worry about, a simple ad phase, and this fantastic transition into the last phase of the fight, complete with this epic song about the endless cycle of bloodshed and war, which fits the character perfectly. I could gush about the music of Final Fantasy XIV for hours. With each expansion we're treated to more amazing tracks spanning a huge range of genres, from epic orchestral pieces to heavy metal, techno, ska, power ballads, J-pop, the list just keeps going on and on. I said it in the last video, but these trials are my favourite content, and a huge part of why is the music. It just keeps getting better and better, and I love it so damn much. Alright, so we take Ravana down and are briefly introduced to a new Ascian who's been watching our exploits. This is Igayorm, and she literally has 2 lines here, claiming that more gods will consume the world in a storm of chaos. Yeah, she's pretty much got the same personality as La Habrea and Nabrialis. It takes a while for Ascians to get really interesting, but for now they're still fairly generic villains, unfortunately. Now that Ravana's no longer a threat, the Dauphiné opens the way to Som-Al, and it's immediately time for our first dungeon. This is a vast improvement on ARR's awkward pacing, as we're going either straight on to the next big battle or important story beat rather than being bogged down by fetch quests. The fetch quests do still exist, but they're much less obnoxious here. Regarding Som-Al as a dungeon, I'll repeat my sentiment from the last video. The dungeons are always linear hallways with 3 bosses and a few groups of enemies in between that you have to fight in waves as you go. There's nothing wrong with a formula that works, but I wish dungeons had a bit more variety in terms of layout and progression from time to time. On the plus side, this is the first dungeon where you're accompanied by the story NPCs if you use the duty support system. Until now, it was just generic adventurers accompanying you, and while some dungeons do still have those, it feels great to be able to play alongside your actual companions like a proper single player RPG. They even get a few lines of dialogue throughout the dungeons, giving their thoughts on what's going on. Again, it's not a major addition, but it's one of those things that really makes a big difference for me. Atop Som-Al, we defeat Nidhogg's consort, Tiamat, fueling the rage that Estinian feels through the eye, and returning the light to our second crystal. We enter another region full of floating islands now called the Churning Mists, which is home not only to dragons, but a clan of Mughals, who are all hiding thanks to some kind of invisibility spell. Okay, so we can't really get away from the awkward pacing after all, but thankfully this section is relatively short. We head back to Gridania to enlist the help of Khan E Senna and one of the Mughals of the forest in order to reveal the mountain's Mughal clan. Their leader then sends us on a bunch of fetch quests to prove our worth. You know what, this isn't all that bad. It takes about 5 minutes and he even jokes about how long it would have taken them to do all these chores and errands. It's self-aware padding and I'm not even mad about it. Anyway, the chieftain gives us a horn with which to summon Hraesvelgr, so it's off to the dragon's home of Zenith to parley. We set up camp for the night and are treated to one of the best scenes in the expansion, with Alphinaud opening up about the downfall of the Scions and the Crystal Braves, Isael explaining how her eyes were open to the truth of the Dragonsong War and her commitment to the pursuit of peace at any cost, and even the stoic Estinian coming to understand Isael's desire for peace, even though he's still ready to kill Nidhogg if it comes down to it. I love it when games take the time to let their characters just talk without the conversation just being about driving the plot forward. It can help you understand and relate to them, leading to much more powerful emotional moments as the story builds up. Alphinaud especially has come so far since we met him in A Realm Reborn. What was once an arrogant little prick has become a mature, respectful, loyal friend, willing to do anything he can to help rather than take it upon himself to be the leader he was never really ready to become. He's learned from his experiences and it's slowly shaping him into a better person. Scenes like this are so important, and this is exactly what I meant by moments that stick with you. Okay, so it's time to parley with Hraesvelgr at last, and learn his side of the story about the war. It turns out that, surprise surprise, it was in fact Thordan and his knights who kicked things off by luring Hraesvelgr's brood sister Ratatoska into an ambush and killing her for her eyes. Nidhogg was the first to learn what happened, attacked and killed Thordan and half his knights, and that's what really started the war. Not only that, but because the knights consumed Ratatoska's eyes, every descendant of them bears some trace of Ratatoska's essence, and it only requires a single sip of dragon's blood to awaken it, forcing them to transform into dragons to join Nidhogg's army. The whole reason the dragons haven't burned Ishgard to the ground already and won the war for themselves is that Nidhogg wants every Elezen, through death or their own free will, to transform and serve him. Jesus Christ. I don't even know how to react to that. Nidhogg's seen his sister slaughtered by these knights, and because of the dragon's perception of time being so different to ours, it's constantly fresh in his mind even after 1,000 years. I couldn't imagine remembering something so vividly for so long. Naturally, it's driven him mad over the years, hence him wanting his revenge to carry on for so long. To him, it might as well have happened yesterday. As I said earlier, you just can't fathom something like that. So with that bombshell dropped on us, and having full knowledge that there's only one way to end the war, we set about tracking Nidhogg down at his lair. The only problem is it's surrounded by a barrier, similar to the one we had to break through to reach Garuda back in A Realm Reborn. Unlike with Garuda, we've got the Dravanians to worry about, who could fly circles around the Enterprise, so we need something a bit more agile. Cue Biggs and Wedge's latest invention, the Mana Cutter. Yep, these guys just happen to be working on exactly what we need. What would we do without them? It'll take a little while until they're ready for use, which gives us a chance to head back and deal with the Nanamo situation. Back at the Waking Sands, our allies have been on the trail of some alchemy shipments being delivered to the palace in Uldar, and we learn that the Sultana is likely still in there. Yugiri has managed to track down her former lady-in-waiting, Meriel, so it's off to find her so that we might learn about the substance used to induce Nanamo's death-like slumber. Upon finding her for ourselves, we're approached by Lolorito and Dulala. After a very awkward conversation in which Lolorito admits to swapping Telegi's poison for the sleeping potion, planting Ilberd in the Crystal Braves himself, and basically orchestrating Telegi's murder at the hands of Raban, he offers a truce, and the antidote for Nanamo. Raban heads to the palace to administer the antidote, and Nanamo wakes up. I can't praise Raban's voice actor enough here. His delivery is absolute perfection.
"'Tis time to wake up, your grace. Another day begins in Thanalan, and the sun blazes bright upon the sands."
You can tell he's overwhelmed with joy and trying so hard to hold back the tears so as to not worry Nanamo. This scene tells such a heartfelt story of how much Raban deeply cares for Nanamo, and it's all told with just 2 lines of dialogue and a few simple facial expressions. I genuinely think this scene doesn't get talked about enough. Raban and Nanamo's relationship is so sweet, and I really wish we got to see more of them together. Before heading back to Ishgard, we make a brief stop at the Rising Stones, where Alphinaud officially disbands the Crystal Braves. The remnants of the group, who are all still loyal to the Scions, all agree to stick by Alphinaud and help us out, which is a great moment of closure for him. It's actually kind of funny to see Alianne here, because I genuinely thought she was one of the traitors. If you remember before the banquet at the end of ARR, she was the one we were sent off to meet with when we stupidly picked up that empty poison vial. But no, it turns out the traitors just stopped her from meeting with us, I guess. So it's time to head into Nidhogg's lair and our second dungeon, the Eyrie. Now I don't want to repeat the hallway complaint, so I'll just say it's a fairly typical dungeon at this point, where we kill more wyverns and other Dravanians than I can count as we hunt down Nidhogg. There's none of this "we beat him up then he flies away" nonsense here. Estinian straight up kills him, gets covered in his blood which turns his armour bright red, and takes his remaining eye, a yellow one, not matching the red one Estinian already had. What's going on here? Well, having our third crystal powered back up lets us access the Echo to find out the truth about the whole situation. First, we learn that Haldrath, son of King Thordan, managed to take Nidhogg's eyes to avenge his father and become the first Azure Dragoon. Refusing to take up his father's throne, he leaves Ishgard in the hands of the 7 remaining knights. 3 of the knights hang up their arms in pursuit of a more honest life, while the remaining 4 form the great noble houses of Ishgard, Fortamp, Hylanart, Durandare and Zemail, to serve as stewards until a true king rises to take the throne. What's important to note here is that everyone in Ishgard, not just the descendants of the 4 noble houses, can trace their lineage back to Thordan and his Knights 12. Everyone has a trace of Ratatoska's essence within them. Secondly, we learn how this yellow eye ended up in Nidhogg's head. Returning to Hraesvelgr, we found out that he granted the blinded Nidhogg half of his strength so that he could enact his revenge. Nidhogg pretty much demanded it, as we see in this flashback, but either way, Hraesvelgr agreed, and so is responsible for the war raging on as long as it had been. And that's the whole truth of the war. Thordan and his knights might have started it, but Hraesvelgr let it carry on for as long as it did. Nobody's hands are clean in this whole mess. Finally learning what actually happened after all this time of hearing the different sides of the story, with everyone carefully omitting details to make themselves look good, leaves you with this feeling of just, man, everyone involved has made such stupid mistakes that led to so much unnecessary violence. What a messed up story. Our troubles aren't over yet. A group of heretics started attacking and setting fires around Ishgard. This whole mess was orchestrated by the church in order to stir up more fear among the people. It's here we see Laha Breya again, who makes his plans clear. He's coming to kill us. Arriving back in the city, Izael quickly talks the heretics down and we try to restore order. Sir Aymeric takes it upon himself to confront Archbishop Thordan about the truth of the war. We then learn from Lucia that Aymeric is in fact the Archbishop's bastard son, and we all agree to head for the vault to break him out if it turns out he's been detained. We need to gather allies for the upcoming assault. This leads us to meet with Hilda, the leader of a group of revolutionaries residing in the lower part of the city known as the Broom. After a little persuasion, and smacking around a member of the Heavensward accusing us of heresy, she agrees to help us out, and we're off to the vault. This is the moment that every Final Fantasy XIV player remembers. Fighting our way through this enormous cathedral alongside Haurchefant and Alphinaud, taking on members of the Heavensward who transform into these giant knights, while Estinian and Lucia free Aymeric from captivity, we catch up to Archbishop Thordan, who is about to flee via airship to somewhere called Azys Lla. Giving chase, one of the knights attacks.
Look out!
Like the true friend he is, Haurchefant protects us from harm and is fatally wounded. This man has stood by our side through thick and thin, always lifting us up when we're down, doing everything in his power to help us, and now...
Oh, do not look at me so. A smile better suits a hero.
He's gone. I cannot overstate the impact this had on players. There's people out there who have shrines to this guy in their in-game houses. You'll occasionally find someone paying respects at his grave, and there isn't a single player who forgets his final words to us. There have been deaths before and there will be more to come, but Haurchefant left such a lasting impression that this is by far the most devastating character death in the entire game. Now we're reaching the final stretch of Heavensward. We need to make it to Azys Lla and take down Archbishop Thordan and the Heavensward. Our search takes us back to the Sea of Clouds, where we run into some familiar faces. It turns out the Garlean Empire are also searching for Azys Lla, as we save a friendly Vanu Vanu from an Imperial unit. The Imperials managed to get themselves into a fight with Bismarck and wounded the Primal in the process, who just straight up eats an entire island to recover his strength. A whole island, in one bite. Jesus! Turns out that island had the key to Azys Lla on it, so we're going to have to take Bismarck down. So Cid comes up with the bright idea of going sky fishing for the Primal, by using his airship, the Enterprise, to tow an island around the Sea of Clouds. This leads to what is by far the single worst trial in Final Fantasy XIV. For the sheer spectacle of it, it's excellent, but in terms of gameplay, well, you have to stand around waiting while killing a handful of enemies on the island before firing a pair of grappling hooks at Bismarck and reeling him in so you can attack him. Do this twice and the trial's over. It's the awkward waiting between phases that makes this thing so tedious to kill. There's virtually nothing interesting about actually fighting Bismarck either. You just kill enemies, shoot the grappling hooks at him, slap him around while he's defenseless, and it's GG. Alright, so we smack Bismarck around in the most underwhelming possible way, and he drops the key to Azys Lla. We power up our 4th crystal and faintly hear Hydaelyn's voice before Igayorm appears alongside Archbishop Thordan to steal the key from us. Back on safe ground, the Imperials, led by the legatus of the 6th Imperial Legion, Regula Van Hydrus, have captured our new Vanu Vanu friends. Regula is just another generic Imperial. There's virtually nothing to be said about him other than he's fiercely loyal to the Emperor. He's got cool armour like the rest of them, but that's all there is to him really. At any rate, we do get one little surprise here. Emperor Varys himself is among the Imperials. As I said before, they're looking for Azys Lla to uncover the secrets it holds about primal containment. And just as they're about to attack, Lucia comes out of nowhere in Magitech armour to fend off the Imperials, who then escape on their massive flagship. Wondering about Lucia's Magitech? Well, it turns out she's the sister of Livia, the Tribunus who we took down way back at Castrum Meridianum. On a mission to Ishgard in search of Allagan relics, the former Imperial met Sir Aymeric, who quickly earned her loyalty and accepted her into his service. Fortunately for us, she doesn't hold our killing of her sister against us, as the two were never all that close. This scene reminds me of Cid's memories coming back in terms of its timing, and the fact that she was a Garlean was obviously telegraphed back in ARR, but I'm not going to complain about the game fleshing out its characters and making Lucia more than just simply a loyal second in command. Making our way to Azys Lla, we quickly find out that it's surrounded by a magical barrier. It's too strong for us to break through like the previous barriers, so Cid comes up with the idea of piercing it by using a ram made of condensed ether. Unfortunately, he doesn't know how to make such a device, but conveniently for us, Tataru managed to track down one of our missing allies who just might be able to help. I know this is just another convenience for the sake of it, but I'm willing to let this one slide because it leads to some really interesting events. We head back to Uldar and learn that Ishtola's wand has been recovered from the tunnel as she collapsed during our escape from the banquet. Urianger informs us that she used an older teleportation spell called Flow to transport her and Thancred to safety. Unlike the teleport spells that we used to get around via Aetherites, Flow gives its user a much more limited ability to navigate the lifestream, and we learn that she might be stuck trying to find her way back out. With a little help from Khan E. Senna and Ishtola's sister Imitra, who just so happens to be the summoner trainer, we're able to commune with the forest's elementals to gain their assistance in bringing Ishtola back. It's a bit of a confusing mess as to how all this works, and definitely makes you wonder about how we plan on getting Thancred back, but the important thing is we've got our favourite magic expert back on the team, complete with her own fancy new outfit from Tataru. So let's address the elephant in the room, Ishtola's eyes. Once green, they're now white, and it's not properly explained at this point. It turns out she's technically blind, but able to see by sensing the ether around her. This apparently drains her life force, but it's barely brought up again from what I remember. And don't get me started on certain other characters' eyes. At any rate, Ishtola throws yet another convenience at us. Her old master, Matoya, just so happens to live near the abandoned city of Sharlayan, located in the Dravanian hinterlands. Now this Sharlayan was technically New Sharlayan, with the actual Sharlayan motherland being located on an island west of Eorzea. Why they didn't just call it something else, I'll never know. Either way, New Sharlayan was abandoned during the Garlean invasion 15 years ago, with Matoya refusing to join the mass exodus and living a hermit's life on the outskirts of the city, so it's off to the Dravanian hinterlands to search for her. This is where the game sort of rushes you through a bunch of different zones in the run-up to the finale, and I can't help but wonder how much of the main scenario was cut during development because of this. We head to the hinterlands, find out the bridges across the river are all destroyed, and enter a smaller section of the city now populated by goblins and treasure hunters, known as Idilshire. All of this takes about 5 minutes, and after a short round of fetch quests, the goblins help us cross the river so we can reach Matoya's cave. Again, it feels like we're being rushed through, and even the final zone of Azizlar feels like this. It would have been nice to explore what was left of Sharlayan and spend time getting to know the residents of Idilshire, especially given how much we end up coming back here for side quests, relic weapons, collectibles, and the weekly Wondrous Tales books that give us bonus experience and other rewards. Regardless, we enter Matoya's cave, and if you're a fan of the very first Final Fantasy, you'll immediately recognise the music and the Fantasia-esque magic brooms. That's Fantasia as in the 1940 Disney musical starring Mickey Mouse, not Fantasia the in-game item that allows you to change your character's appearance, by the way. At any rate, we're here to learn the secrets of her research into something called an etheric converger, which is just what we need to make Cid's ram. Unfortunately for us, this research is under heavy guard in the Great Goobel Library's Forbidden Tome section. This dungeon is based on the Library of the Ancients from Final Fantasy V, complete with monsters and bosses from the SNES Classic, including the bane of my existence in that game, page 64, which still casts level 5 death. If you know, you know. Much like the Crystal Tower raid series, is a wonderfully faithful adaptation and a great throwback. So we find the book we're looking for, light up our 5th crystal and head back to Matoya to get it magically deciphered before returning to Ishgard to make our final preparations. While Cid gets to work on the etheric ram, Urianger turns up to deliver us yet another convenience. He happened upon another piece of white auracite while going through Moonbreeder's possessions. Boarding the newly renamed Enterprise Excelsior, we make our way to Azizlar and break through the barrier, only for the Imperial flagship to come out of nowhere and attack us. I can only suspend my disbelief so much. Do you really think they could hide a ship that gigantic and that loud in the clouds without us noticing it? And then his sail comes out of nowhere riding Hraesvelgr into battle to save us from it. This is so ridiculous. Like I said, the writing's been great, but the story really starts to fall apart in the last couple of hours, like they desperately needed to rush to fit in a bunch more content towards the end. This makes the next scene fall flat for me. So Isael jumps off the dragon, transforms into Shiva, takes down the Imperial ship, and dies, exploding into ether in the process. It's a great scene for the pure spectacle of it, but it really needed a better build-up to work as this big heroic sacrifice. It's just an out-of-nowhere death for the sake of it, and what makes it worse is the Empire feels shoehorned in. You barely see or interact with them throughout the story, and it feels like they're just there to remind you that they still exist while you're dealing with otherwise unrelated issues. And the fact that we're about to take the 6th Legion on with an actual battle with Regula only for him to get away at the end of it doesn't help matters either. It's a genuinely disappointing couple of hours that blemish an otherwise excellently paced and well-told story. Okay, rant over. It's time for the endgame. Making our way through this massive zone, we smack around some Imperials in the aforementioned battle, as we make our way to the Etherochemical Research Facility at the centre of the massive flagship in the middle of the region. After the battle, our allies stay behind to fend off some Imperial reinforcements, and Estinian gives us Nidhogg's eye so that we might use it to kill an Ascian trapped in our aura sight. Along the way, we run across another of Midgard Sommer's children, Tiamat, who's imprisoned here. She reveals to us that it was her who consorted with the Ascians to bring back Bahamut after the Allagans slaughtered him and their children, leading to Bahamut's capture and imprisonment in the Lesser Moon Dalamud, and we all know how well that ended up. This is where our 6th and final crystal lights back up, and we're able to commune with Hydaelyn once more. The tiny Midgard Sommer then transforms into a larger dragon that we ride straight to the research facility, and it's time for our final dungeon. If you play through the cores of Bahamut, this place will seem pretty familiar. It's an Allagan research facility full of experimental creatures, dragons, clones, and defense drones. Fighting our way through, we reach the central chamber and are confronted by Igayom and La Habrea. This is actually one of the more interesting boss encounters in the game, starting out with us taking both Ascians on at once, each flinging different spells at us, before they literally do the fusion dance and combine into one entity known as an Ascian Prime. It's wacky as hell, but it makes for a great boss fight, with some tight timing on the attacks that can easily kill you if you're not ready for it. After taking that monstrosity down, the Ascians split back into two, and we're able to trap and kill Igayom with our aura sight. With our eye's power drained, Archbishop Thordan and the Heavensward make their entrance. And if you were thinking, I bet they've got the other eye, you'd be right. The remaining eye is fused to the armour of Haldrath, the first Azure Dragoon, who had been consumed by its power. Despite being dead for almost 1,000 years, his body never decayed. In a similar manner to Isael's summoning of Shiva, the Archbishop becomes the legendary King Thordan, and using the eye's power is able to trap La Habrea within his sword.
By taking unto my flesh the soul of the legendary King Thordan, I am become a god!
For my first act as God King, I do hereby sentence you to die!
But despite this act, we can't let the Mad God King dominate Eorzea, and so our final battle begins. This is a bloody great trial where we take on King Thordan and the Heavensward, now transformed into his Knights 12. One by one they all come at us, unleashing a variety of different attacks, culminating in a gigantic attack from all 12 of them and Thordan himself. It's literally the Final Fantasy VII summoned Knights of the Round, but as a full-blown gauntlet of a boss fight. What an absolutely phenomenal way to finish the expansion. I can't praise this fight enough. With the Archbishop and the Heavensward defeated, Estinian arrives to claim back both of Nidhogg's eyes, and is almost immediately consumed by the dragon's wrath, transforming into Nidhogg himself and flying away. But that's a problem for another time. We escape the collapsing facility and ride back to Ishgard, who are finally able to rejoin the Eorzean alliance.
For the future of Eorzea!
For the future of Eorzea!
As the credits roll, we pay our respects to Lord Horshaphant at his lone grave overlooking the city. And so ends this glorious chapter in our tale. Post-credits we see Elidibus speaking to someone he calls the Warrior of Darkness, who is about to join the fray. And so that's the base game of Heavensward. It's a truly wonderful story that unfortunately falls apart a bit in its final hours. I wish more time was given to the last handful of zones, and that there weren't too many of these awkward contrived moments during that time, but apart from that honestly fairly minor blemish, it's absolutely one of the best main scenario questlines in the entire game. There's still a fair bit to go, as we're about to finally finish the Dragonsong War for good and set up the events leading into Stormblood, as well as find out what happened to our friends and who these Warriors of Darkness are. But the base expansion itself is a huge step up over A Realm Reborn, and things only get better as we go. So let's talk about the status of the Scions. Back when we fled the banquet at Uldar, Ida and Papalymo stayed behind to fend off our pursuers. Their whereabouts are currently unknown, but our allies did manage to track down the remains of their link pearls, the inner communicators everyone has but you never physically see, which is a whole other narrative contrivance I don't want to get into right now. It appears they ditched the link pearls after escaping, so while we have no method of contacting them, at least they're still alive and out there somewhere. Thancred and Y'shtola were next to disappear, with Y'shtola using Flow to teleport the duo away. We've already rescued her from being trapped in the livestream, but Thancred's whereabouts are currently unknown. The same goes for Minfilia, who literally just ran away at the end because Hydaelyn told her to, which still makes no bloody sense. At any rate, Tataru does have some good news for us. The Scions have managed to enlist the services of one of the students of Baldesion to help with our search, who should be arriving in the region soon. Before we can meet with our new ally, we're summoned by Sir Aymeric to discuss the current state of affairs surrounding Ishgard and the war. In the wake of Thordan's defeat, Aymeric has temporarily assumed the late Archbishop's responsibilities, and with the truth of the war coming to light, saying he's got a lot on his plate would be an understatement. The unrest among the people is becoming difficult to keep under control, and with Estinian transformed into Nidhogg's Shade waiting to strike, the chance of tensions between man and dragon escalating is high. The Lord Commander decides the best course of action is to arrange a peace treaty with the dragons of Annex Trine, so that the Dragonsong War can finally become one step closer to a definitive end. Alongside Lucia, we head to meet with Vidofnir, and as ever friendly as the dragon is, she can't give us an answer regarding Ishgard's offer of peace at the moment. Leaving Lucia to negotiate with the other dragons, we head for the Dravanian hinterlands to meet with the aforementioned student of Baldesion, a fellow Echo user by the name of Kryl. This was such a nice surprise for me. Final Fantasy V was the second Final Fantasy game I played, and the first to really make me fall in love with the series on a whole, and Kryl is based on the character of the same name from that game. Her grandfather Galuf is also referenced a ton, and seeing one of my favourite, and one of the most overlooked, entries in the series represented so well is a joy to behold. This version of Kryl is intelligent and sassy, as she quickly demonstrates by embarrassing poor Alphino while reminiscing about their past. These more light-hearted moments are a welcome sight, and thankfully end up becoming a lot more frequent as we go. So Kryl thinks she can follow the trail of Y'shtola's teleportation magic back to Thancred, but in order to do so she needs the help of someone who just so happens to live nearby. Matoya is in possession of an ancient crystal of light which she calls her Crystal Eye, and after following his trail, Kryl learns that Thancred just so happens to have been thrown out of the livestream a short walk away from here near Som Al. Our search leads us to the Vath camp again, where their leader tells us a man matching Thancred's description had been trading with them recently, only to head into Nath territory upon learning that Ravana had been summoned again. Gearing up for round 2 with the Warrior Primal, we arrive to find that someone's beaten us to it. Remember that Warrior of Darkness Elidibus was speaking with? Well, it turns out there's a whole party of them. They easily take Ravana down, and we see a very interesting flashback, wherein they defeat an Ascian, claiming to be ridding the world of them forever. Before we have time to process what we were just shown, the group attacks. These guys are vicious and coordinated, seeming one step ahead of us the whole time. That is, until they're interrupted by the very man we're looking for. Thancred arrives on the scene and fends off the leader of the group, and I've got to say, that outfit is certainly something. I'm no fashion expert, but I can't believe someone at Square Enix seriously thought, yup, that's totally a good look for him. Thancred's supposed to be this sort of suave ladies man and infiltration expert, but this makes him look like something only early 2000s emo kids would think is cool. Wait, this is the expansion that gave us Dark Knight. That explains a lot. So our attackers reveal themselves to be, as we expected, the Warriors of Darkness, walkers of a different path. They teleport away and we're reunited with our edgy boy Thancred. The game almost redeems itself for the dodgy outfit by showing some hilarious stills of Thancred's escapades after being dumped out of the livestream completely naked. The strategically placed squirrel is bloody brilliant. Apart from that, there's not really much to talk about regarding what he's been up to. He managed to do some hunting, trade with the Vath for the stupid clothes he's wearing, and here we are. Kinda wish there was more to it, but either way, that's one more of our friends accounted for. Kryl heads back to Matoya so the two can work out how to track Minfilia down, and the rest of us head back to Vidofnir to deliver the good news that Ravana is, once again, out of the picture. The dragons accept Aymeric's invitation, but its timing could not be worse. While walking through the streets of Ishgard, Aymeric is stabbed by a passerby, and the city is plunged into chaos. Luckily for him, the wound isn't serious, and he's almost immediately back to work, as an armed mob calling themselves the True Brothers of the Faith seizes control of the vault. Taking hostages, they declare the Lord Commander is guilty of patricide and high treason, and demand he surrenders himself to be judged by the Fury at once. It's kinda silly because I'm pretty sure Aymeric was still in the city when we were slaughtering his old man, but I digress. What happens next is pretty uncomfortable to watch. We make our second trip to the vault in another pretty solid solo duty, where we're taking down these so-called True Brothers and rescuing hostages before confronting the priest leading them, who is threatening to throw a little girl off the roof of the building. Aymeric proves a terrible hostage negotiator, and the priest pushes the girl off. There's been a lot of evil dudes doing some pretty heinous things throughout this game, but I despise this piece of crap more than any of them so far. It's probably my fear of heights talking, but this is such a horrific thing to even think about doing to a kid. It's just as well Vidofnir swoops in just at the nick of time to save her life. I don't care that this is just another convenient moment, I'm just glad I didn't have to watch a kid die like that. At any rate, Vidofnir's here to let us know Nidhogg's shade is called out to his brood, and they've answered the call. There's a short continuation of a plot thread which popped up at the end of ARR now, as the game gives us our sort of end-of-patch cliffhanger. First we see Urianger in the Great Library alongside Elidibus and the leader of the Warriors of Darkness. Someone familiar is spying on them, but that's all we see for now. Next, we finally find out what's going on with Ida and Papalymo. They seem to be working alongside a group known as the Masks, who are plotting an attack on the Imperials. Krile meets us back in Ishgard to deliver some good news. She hypothesises that Hydaelyn contacting Minfilia to make her stay behind after the banquet escape would have left some sort of residual trace in the ether. In order to establish the existence of such a trace, Krile and Thancred set off for Castrum Meridianum, and the site of our showdown with the Ultima weapon, which is another spot where Hydaelyn directly interceded to help us. This leads to my biggest issue with Thancred. I know I've harped on about his edgy outfit, but this has been driving me up the wall for years. This is the only scene where he takes off that bandana thing he's got covering his left eye, and we get to see that it's changed colour. The colour change is never once spoken about, and after his next outfit change in Shadowbringers, his eyes go back to normal. There's a fair bit of dialogue about him losing his ability to use magic, which I assumed was the explanation for his eye, but no, when it changes back he's still incapable of casting spells. I can only assume it was meant to stay like it is in this scene, but the character artist just forgot about it. It's a glaring oversight, especially considering 14 is usually great at calling back to even the most minor of events and characters. This will always be that one mildly infuriating plot hole that never ends up addressed. At any rate, Krile's hypothesis turns out to be correct, and upon further study of the site where Y'shtola used flow, it turns out that 3 people had been infected by the magic. It would appear that Hydaelyn intervened to summon Minfilia into the Ethereal Sea, and of course there's a convenient way for us to get there and confirm Minfilia's whereabouts. That's right, it's back to Matoya so she can open the entrance to the Anti-Tower, a Sharlayan construction designed to provide scholars with a vantage point over the Ethereal Sea. I've always loved the design of this dungeon. As the name would suggest, the Anti-Tower is an upside-down tower that we have to work our way down to the top of. I love these sorts of topsy-turvy visual designs, and it looks great going down the up staircases and seeing chandeliers hanging upwards and so on. That is until we get to the end boss, Final Fantasy IV's Calcabrina. I don't know what it is about porcelain dolls, but these things are really creepy. So we make our way to the top of the tower and are once again called out to by Hydaelyn. Floating in front of the Mother Crystal, we're greeted by Minfilia, who has now ascended to a higher existence as the Word of the Mother, a sort of proxy for the weakened Hydaelyn. In a rather cryptic fashion, she explains the truth about our world. In the beginning, light and dark lived in perfect harmony, but the darkness coveted power, and the balance was broken. Hydaelyn was forced to banish him to the distant heavens to remain apart. In doing so, the planet, which the game often refers to as our star, was sundered, causing 13 reflections, or alternate versions, of the planet to be divided across different planes of existence, with ours, the original version, being known as the Source. So the Ascians plan to bring back Zodiark, the darkness in this story, involves bringing the 13 reflections back together in the Source. The rejoining they've been trying to make happen is what happens when one of the reflections comes back to the Source, with each accompanied by a calamity. And if you're keeping score at home, that means 7 of the 13 reflections have been successfully rejoined, leaving 6 alternate versions of our world still out there. Each rejoining is strengthening Zodiark, while Hydaelyn's failed attempts to stop them has slowly drained her of her strength. It's an interesting spin on the whole multiverse concept, which thankfully does get elaborated on in much greater detail later on down the line, but for now we're just given the cliff notes. Looking back on this scene, it's impressive how clear of a vision the writers had for the overarching narrative, and there's one line in particular that sticks out like a sore thumb if you know where the game ends up taking us. So, about Minfilia then. Having joined herself with Hydaelyn, and both struggling to maintain their form, let alone communicate with her chosen, it's safe to assume that we're never getting Minfilia back. The Scions don't take this news very well, least of all Thancred, who cared about her more than anyone. Not in love with her or anything like that, but he still has a very deep connection with her. He distances himself from us for a little while and starts lashing out at the people around him as he struggles to come to terms with the fact that he'll never see Minfilia again. I know I've given him a lot of crap since he came back, but I really feel for the guy. He's lost the one thing that mattered the most to him, and he's not given any time to properly grieve or even process any of it. I've been there, and being forced to pick yourself up and carry on like nothing happened can tear you apart. I don't want to bog things down here, but I don't think I've ever related to a video game character on such a level. I know exactly how he feels, and it's truly horrible. After Matoya and Y'shtola attempt to lift our spirits, it's back to Ishgard to meet with Sir Aymeric, who has managed to arrange a peace conference between Ishgard and the Dravanians, due to take place shortly at Falcon's Nest. Arriving at the settlement, we meet with Dawntrail and Hydaelyn, who are both called away to deal with a small group of people pledging to attack any Dravanians who come near, as well as stand watch for any unruly wildlife in the area. A bit too convenient timing if you ask me. While we wait for the ceremony to get underway, we've got time for a quick break at the local tavern, where a particularly chatty waitress chews our ear off about the war and the upcoming peace conference. That nice warm drink she gave us was spiked with a sedative of some sort, and we black out. Turns out the waitress is part of a group of conspirators who all lost loved ones to the Dravanians, and she's plotting to disrupt the conference. Once we wake back up, we see her trying to stir up trouble among the people, and not knowing what else to do, Hydaelyn orders the guards to stop her. A panicked soldier shoots the young woman, and chaos ensues. Her fellow conspirators were either captured, killed, or took their own lives, but thankfully no civilians were seriously hurt. Naturally, Hydaelyn is crushed by his guilt for setting the whole chain of events into motion, and upon finding his manservant Honor injured by some of the fleeing guests, he lashes out and ends up punching Thancred, which ends about as well as you'd expect. In an attempt to lift the spirits of Ishgard's people and restore some honour to the city, Aymeric arranges a friendly competition between them and the rest of the Eorzean Alliance, the Grand Melee. This is the most in-depth solo duty yet. It even has a full-blown tutorial with its own mechanics and scoring system. I'm honestly surprised at how much effort was put into this thing. So the rules are as follows. On one side are the various representatives of the Eorzean Alliance, featuring members of all the Grand Companies, including the commanding officers and even General Raban. On the other side is the Ishgardian team, made up of ourselves, members of the Temple Knights, Hilda and her allies, Hydaelyn trying to restore some honour to his house and redeem himself, Lucia and even Sir Aymeric himself. Taking down a member of the opposing team awards your side 1 point, while defeating combatants marked with the Fury's gaze, indicated by a tether between them and their team's flag, earns your side 10 points. The first team to reach 100 points wins. In terms of how it plays, as long as you focus on the marked enemies, it's incredibly easy to win. Still, it's a lot of fun getting into this giant brawl, watching Raban and Aymeric dueling in the middle, and even getting to smack Pippin around. Man, that sounded so much better when I wrote it. Anyway, as the battle draws to a close, a Cyclops tries to enter the fray. Thancred fends it off, but it was enough of a distraction for Raban to take out a few of the Ishgardians, including Aymeric, and force us into a duel inside a ring of fire. Yeah, it's really cool being able to take Raban on, even if he's no match for the Warrior of Light. So the final score for me ended up being 100 to 50. Told you it was easy. With morale at an all-time high, Hydaelyn finally seeing the error of his ways and being inspired to forge ahead, and even Thancred starting to come to terms with things, or at least being distracted long enough to not let Minfilia affect him as much, it's time to give this peace conference another go. This time the proceedings actually go ahead, as Vidofnir joins Aymeric as the Lord Commander unveils a mural of Shiva and Hraesvelgr to symbolise the bond between man and dragon. The ceremony is once again cut short, however, as Estinian finally reappears to attack Vidofnir, with Nidhogg's eyes now fused to his armour and looking like the end boss of a Resident Evil game. And I can't believe I've been able to make references to that series twice now. Despite the attack looking pretty horrific, Vidofnir survives and is taken back home to recover, while our allies discuss the possibility of saving Estinian from Nidhogg's influence without having to kill him. Slim as the chances may be, we're not about to give up hope. With that in mind, taking on a being possessing 2 dragon eyes is no small feat, so Aymeric decides to position Hraesvelgr's aid. This is the first time we interact with Hraesvelgr since way back before the Vault, and only the second time we see him since then. Want to know his explanation as to why he carried his sail into battle at Azizlar? Her passion reminded him of Shiva. That's it. As I said when his sail sacrificed herself, I really wish there was more to it than just that. A flashback here to show her pleading to him would have been nice, or a cutter wagering events leading up to her sacrifice, but no, all we get is this one throwaway line. After being so angry at his sail for even mentioning Shiva, and telling her that the version of Shiva she summoned was based on her own vision of the woman and not actually the real thing, referring to it as an abomination, he just changes his mind? What makes it worse is Hraesvelgr's just as stubborn as he was before, not wanting to fight his brood brother, but all it takes is Midgard Soma telling him it's a shade and not the real thing to convince him to change his mind. At any rate, he decides to test our abilities before joining us in battle, and so opens up our next dungeon, Sor Kai, a set of ancient ruins where Ratatoska once lived. There's some great visual design on show here as we fend off all sorts of constructs and dragons, a bizarre encounter with the Moogle chief which ends up being a fun throwback to King Mogglemog, and a showdown with Hraesvelgr himself at the end. I can only speak from personal experience, but this is one of those dungeons I never see in the duty roulettes. But it's kind of weird, I see the Anti-Tower on occasion, and the final post-Heavensward dungeon a lot, but I barely see this one. Luck of the draw, I guess. I suppose an advantage of going back through the story is getting to revisit places like this. We managed to impress Hraesvelgr enough for him to join us in battle, just in time to hear Nidhogg cry out to signal the assault on Ishgard. Arriving at the Steps of Faith, where we repelled a prior attack at the end of ARR, Hraesvelgr does battle with Nidhogg. Another great fight scene with the two dragons tearing the skies open only for Nidhogg to gain the upper hand and defeat his brother. But our new ally has one trick left up his sleeve, and lends us his eye so that we might use its power to end Nidhogg's reign of terror once and for all. What follows is one of the most beautiful songs in the game backing a tremendous end boss fight. The handful of songs the legendary Nobuo Uematsu composed for Final Fantasy XIV show that the man really never misses. All due credit to main composer Masayoshi Soken, but Uematsu will always be the greatest of all time to me. The battle itself is pretty great. We start by fighting Nidhogg himself, similar to the Aerie fight, followed by a short ad phase, then a shift in tone and music as he transforms back into Estinian, with a completely different range of abilities, and this souped up fiery version of Nidhogg for the grand finale. It's a nice varied encounter with no phase outstaying its welcome. With Nidhogg defeated, we tear his eyes from Estinian's armour, with a little help from the ghosts of our departed allies. That's the true power of friendship right there. And instead of destroying them or somehow keeping them separated, we throw them both off the same side of the bridge. What an absolute genius move that's definitely not going to come back to haunt us. The day is saved, the Dragonsong War has finally come to an end, and all that's left is to hope that Estinian recovers from the events. We visit the Azure Dragoon at Ishgard's infirmary shortly after, and oh no, he's hot. He seems to just need a bit of rest and he'll soon be back on his feet. In the wake of our triumph, Aymeric called an assembly to declare the separation of church and state in Ishgard, forming a new republic and stepping down from his duties as acting head of state, only to be almost immediately raised to the highest seat in Ishgard's House of Lords. And so ends the tale of the Dragonsong War, as we see Count Edmund finally closing the book on Heavensward. All that's left now is to find our missing friends and deal with those pesky warriors of darkness. But first, it's time for date night with Aymeric! Finally! The part we've all been waiting for, and I totally forgot to dress up for the occasion. This is a largely quiet scene thanks to not having a voiced protagonist, not that I'd complain about that, where the two of us reminisce about our recent adventures, trying to make light of what little we can. You might argue that it's entirely pointless, to which I would enthusiastically tell you that Aymeric is incredibly important and how dare you call Daddy pointless. But again, this is the kind of scene that really matters. It's giving the characters time to be themselves and not worry about driving the plot forward. It also shows that we're here for the downtime as well as the grand adventures, and gives us that sense of actually being a meaningful part of the world and our companions' lives. They're more than just our allies, they're our friends, and who doesn't want to spend time hanging out with their friends? Our dinner is interrupted by a knight from House Fortemps, who brings us urgent news. Thancred has just returned to the city with an injured woman, and our presence is requested at once. If you didn't play through the Claws of Bahamut raids in A Realm Reborn, this will be your character's first interaction with Alisaie since meeting her at the Remembrance ceremonies. Thankfully, she's about to have a much larger presence, and her confidence and take-no-shit attitude make her quickly become one of my favourite characters. Alisaie had been spying on the Warriors of Darkness until recently, where she was shot and poisoned by their archer, Jerumel, and while she's still in need of medical attention, she tells us they're heading to Zelphatol, a windswept mountain range and home to the Ixal tribe. Slaughtering primals is a part of their plan, and they're heading to the mountains in order to have the Ixal summon Garuda, purely so they can kill her. Zelphatol's a pretty mediocre dungeon, truth be told, but the boss design's pretty nice. There's a boss that uses a balloon to stop us from hitting him, so we have to get ourselves launched into him to pop it, as well as another boss in an arena surrounded by spikes who uses a bunch of knockback attacks. It's the wave-based fighting with normal enemies that really drags this place down. It's incredibly slow-paced compared to other dungeons, and the fact that it's another mountain range makes it feel like a worse version of Somal. The end boss here does actually summon Garuda throughout the fight, which is a neat little throwback, but by the time I was there I just wanted it to be over. I will say my recording software decided to bug out at this point and I ended up having to run the dungeon a second time, so that probably didn't help matters for me. At any rate, we take down the Ixal chief and Garuda just in time for the Warriors of Darkness to make their entrance, flanked by a sixth person who looks awfully familiar. But that veil on his face means it could be anybody, right? Before they teleport away again, their leader, Arbut, finally sheds some light on their story. Remember the tale about the Sundering and the 13 reflections of our world that Minfilia told us? Well, these guys are from the one closest to ours, the First. Like us, they were blessed by Hydaelyn and once fought against the Ascians. The forces of light and dark were out of balance in the First, with light having a far greater presence. This led them to easily taking down their enemies, and just as they thought they'd claimed victory, a flood of pure, blinding light came to wipe out most of the life in their world. Soon it will completely consume the First, and so they joined forces with the Ascians and came to the Source, claiming that the Ardor, another name for the Rejoining, is the only hope they have of saving their world. Another tidbit he drops on us here is that another world, the 13th, had met a similar fate to theirs, and had been consumed by darkness, turning it into what we call the Void, or what others call the World of Darkness. The same World of Darkness where we fought back the Cloud of Darkness to prevent it consuming our world. Getting to learn about the different worlds is great. A world where light's actually causing it to be destroyed is such a simple yet brilliant concept, and it really turns the whole premise of the game's light versus dark story on its head. It's a great tease for something that we'll get to learn a lot more about later on, and believe me, I can't wait to get there. Back in Ishgard, Alice is finally well enough to join us on our journey, complete with a brand new outfit that thankfully doesn't match her brother's, as we learn that the Ascians have been manipulating certain groups into making sure each of the realm's beast tribes maintains a steady supply of crystals. Alongside the siblings Leveilleur, we head back to Lenosha and run into a young kobold called Garbu, who tells us that his parents have been taken away by the Kobold Patriarch, who plans to resummon Titan. We make our way through the mines to the kobold's hideout, where we find a horrific scene. Garbu's parents, among other kobolds, dead. Their remaining ether is to be used in summoning Titan. While we try to talk the Patriarch down, Garbu cries out to his parents, begging them to open their eyes and say something. This completes the summoning, and it's time to take Titan down once again. I ran this unsynced to save time because the trial is largely the same as the one in ARR, but there's one key difference. Every one of Titan's lines of dialogue has been replaced by Garbu's cries to his parents. Grim stuff. After banishing Titan once more, we head outside to find Garbu completely unresponsive. We're not sure if he's in shock or if he's fallen under Titan's influence. Either way, Alice seems to have become attached to the little guy, and can't let him be put to death. As we have a heartfelt conversation with her that evening, she makes it clear that she wants to find a way to save him from his condition, quoting Louis Soir,
"To ignore the plight of those one might conceivably save is not wisdom, it is indolence. We must all protect that which we hold most dear in the manner of our own choosing."
And in the very next scene, we see the masked ally of the Warriors of Darkness quoting the exact same line to Arbut, as if his speech and the fact that Arbut specifically mentions how he betrayed his former friends couldn't make it any more obvious that this was Urianger. Anyway, he basically tells Arbut to abandon the primals and go kill the Warrior of Light. Thanks, friend! So Alice manages to convince the nearby Maelstrom captain to take Garbu in, instead of adhering to the Alliance's typical protocol of killing tempered people, and makes the promise to one day save him. Honestly, I completely forgot about this plot thread until it ended up resolved way later on. It's not a bad story, far from it. It's a tragic tale and it should have stuck with me the first time round. Really not sure why I forgot about it. At any rate, we make our way to the Waking Sands, where Urianger has dug up some information on the rejoining. Apparently, when a reflection rejoins the source, all life on the reflection dies, with their essences returned to the source to be born anew. If the Warriors of Darkness succeed, all remaining life on the first will die. There's no chance of actually saving their world after all. The next supply line we're to investigate is in Little Alamigo, where we find out someone calling himself the Griffin is radicalizing the refugees into joining the fight to liberate their homeland. This is the leader of the group Ida and Papalimo have been working for, and as luck would have it, we're finally reunited with our old friends. Under the suspicion that this rebel group plans to summon the Primal to take the Imperials on with, we set up a meeting with the man posing as the Griffin at their rallies. That's right, this guy is so paranoid and so secretive about his identity that he hires a double to do all his speeches for him. I don't know if that's clever or extremely arrogant. Either way, we learn they're actually giving the crystals to the Emulger in exchange for help fighting the Imperials. So we make our way to the Ball of Embers, the site where we first fought Ifrit, only to find the Emoldra slaughtered by the Warriors of Darkness. And I totally forgot to change out of the disguise for meeting with the fake Griffin. Not to worry, the game gives you just enough time to change clothes before the fight begins. It's a pretty underwhelming encounter, at least to begin with, where we take on all 5 of the Warriors of Darkness, who don't have any particularly exciting abilities, apart from being able to get back up over and over thanks to the Echo. About halfway through the battle, the most obvious reveal in the history of obvious reveals happens, and Urianger saves us from being trapped by Arbit. Oh no, he's hot! Phase 2 begins with Urianger on our side, pulling the old double betrayal, and has us channeling ether into Alice's sword so she can strike the Warriors of Darkness down. Again, a fairly underwhelming fight, but with interruptions to stand still for a few seconds. I'm not sure how they could have improved this, to be honest. Maybe some team-up attacks where you have to coordinate with the whole group or something. The battle ends and our enemies are still raring to go, and reveal to us that they, much like the Ascians, are beyond death. They gave up their lives to come here, using their crystals of light to maintain a physical form. They did everything in their power to save their world, and it wasn't enough. They sacrificed their lives and still continue to fight, because they can't let all they've done be for nothing. Getting back up, they try to use their crystals to give themselves more strength, and Urianger shows off what he was plotting all along. He tells us to use our crystal against them, and doing so takes all 10 of us into the ethereal sea to meet with Minfilia again. Urianger then offers the crystals that both sides have been using to Hydaelyn, granting her enough strength to send Minfilia to the first to halt the flood of light, saving what's left of their world. This scene leaves me with way more questions than answers, but the important thing is we've had our chance to say goodbye to our old friends, we've stopped the Warriors of Darkness from acting out the Ascians' will, and that's one less threat to worry about. As Minfilia leaves, she gives us Tupsimati, Louis Soir's old staff, and takes the Warriors of Darkness home. So that's everything wrapped up, right? Well, not quite. There's still one little thing to take care of, and his name is the Griffin. As our party returns to the Rising Stones for a much needed rest, Papalimo offers to take Tupsimati off our hands, and seeing no reason not to entrust it to him, we let him hold on to the staff. Remember how we threw Nidhogg's eyes off the bridge to Ishgard? Well, it turns out Elidibus got his hands on them, and has handed them over to the Griffin. I told you we should have destroyed them or kept them apart. Our final stretch picks up as an injured Alamegan woman called Monargo arrives at the Rising Stones to deliver a message. The Griffin is gearing up to attack Baelsar's Wall, an Imperial stronghold on the border of the Black Shroud and Alamigo, in an attempt to spark a conflict between the Eorzean Alliance and the Imperial forces in Alamigo, to have Eorzea's armies aid in the liberation effort whether they want to or not. Meeting with Alliance leaders, we arrange for a defensive force to be deployed to stop any fighting that might break out. This plays right into the Griffin's hand, as his group of resistance fighters assaults the wall dressed in Grand Company uniforms to make it look like Eorzea is invading. So it's time for our final dungeon, as we fight our way to the top of Baelsar's Wall. The best way I can describe this place is it's basically another Imperial stronghold similar to Castrum Meridianum. Imperials everywhere and lots, and I mean lots, of Magitech to destroy. Making our way to the top, we confront the Griffin, and I'm just going to let this reveal play out in its entirety. Of course it's Ilberd. He just takes his mask off and that's it. No dialogue either, just straight into the fight. It's not a bad boss fight, but he does like to repeat the same couple of lines over and over and over. So after giving it to him good, Ilberd reveals his plan to summon a primal more powerful than Bahamut itself. And using the power of Nidhogg's eyes and bizarrely jumping off the wall to his death, the summoning begins. In an attempt to contain the primal before it can be fully summoned, Papalimo uses Tupsimati to trap it in the same manner that Louisor tried, and failed, to contain Bahamut during the calamity. The spell he uses to do so consumes all of its user's ether, and knowing this, he sacrifices his life to buy us time to come up with a way to deal with the primal. I'll be honest, they kinda did Papalimo dirty with this one. Outside of a handful of lines of dialogue, everyone pretty much forgets about him once we get to Stormblood. There's no big tribute to him like with Horshaphant, just Ida mourning him briefly and then she just gets over it. There's a little nod to him in Endwalker if I remember correctly, but other than that, we almost never hear his name again. It's a bit odd considering he sacrificed himself to save so many lives. Dude's a hero as far as I'm concerned and deserves to be remembered. Regardless, we've got to figure out how to deal with this new primal, but not before a new face turns up at the Waking Sands. This absolute mountain of a man is Gosetsu, a samurai of Doma, who has come to bring Yugiri back to their home as their master seems to be in some sort of trouble. I love this guy. He's absolutely there for some much needed comic relief at first, but he becomes this very blunt but gentle giant with a heart of gold.
Nay, I will not hearken to the feeble grumblings of an empty belly. Duty comes before all.
Good man, are you alright?
So about the primal then. While discussing matters with Cid and the Alliance leaders, our old frenemy Nero turns up to offer his help. He plans to awaken Omega, the ancient weapon housed within the ruins at Cartano, so it can do what it was made for and destroy the new primal. After a little convincing, our party sets off to the ruins, where we run into another Imperial unit, led by yet another big beefy dude for us to kill, Grinowat. At least this one's got a bit more to him than that. He's an obviously incompetent brute who looks utterly ridiculous with his blush and the plaster on his face. The exact opposite of intimidating for sure. And the encounter's surprisingly fun, with us piloting Nero's Magitech armour, the Red Baron, to take out a bunch of Imperials and Magitech alongside our allies, including my boy Gosetsu. After the battle, we head into the control chamber for Omega and unleash the ancient weapon. The primal breaks out of its prison and we're treated to an epic battle between the two. We later learn that this primal is known as Shinryu, another recurring boss from the series, and it's every bit as powerful as Ilberd made it out to be. The clash rages on, causing a lot of destruction, and it seems that both combatants manage to land a killing blow on one another as they're launched off towards Alamigo. The day is kind of saved, but war is on the horizon. Meeting with Ida, she finally unmasks and reveals her real name to be Lise. Turns out the real Ida died 6 years ago while smuggling refugees out of Alamigo, and her little sister Lise took up her mask and name, becoming Papalimo's new partner. This is a complete 180 for the character, going from this sort of dumb and naive fighter to a determined and strong woman, driven by her desire to see her homeland free once more. It's a bit of a strange retcon for her, and I'm still not quite sure if the name change was even necessary, but it ends up being a vast improvement over the typical Final Fantasy ditzy female character trope that's been done to death over the years. It's a relic of an older time that never really served a purpose other than to have these sort of wacky characters for the sake of it. See the likes of Yuffie from Final Fantasy VII or Riku from Final Fantasy X, for example. They're not bad characters, but they're extremely one-note, so it's good to see Square Enix's character writing mature at last. And that's the end of this chapter of our story. Yugiri and Gosetsu are heading home, Rauban has led the Grand Companies to victory at Belsar's Wall, making the first step towards liberating Alamigo, and we're briefly introduced to the Imperial Viceroy in charge over there, who is about to become someone you will love to hate for a long time to come. What a story. Apart from rushing through the last couple of zones and fumbling the end of Isael's story, which could both be addressed by adding in a handful of extra quests and cutscenes to flesh things out a little bit more, Heavensward is an absolute triumph and deserving of all the praise it gets. It's such a substantial improvement over A Realm Reborn, and is more than worth the time it takes to access and play through. Thank you for watching. I loved almost every minute of going back through Heavensward. I hope I wasn't too harsh with my criticisms. I just want to make it clear that I criticise out of love and by no means think any of my complaints drag the overall experience down. If anything, I think the game does so much so well that it earns having the odd contrivance or misstep here and there. And I'll learn a few more before we're done. Next week we're heading east to the Alamigan front, in what I think is the most underrated expansion, Stormblood. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and let me know if I was too harsh on Isael, and I hope to see you next week. Take care everybody.